So, guys, when you hear the Tinubu's government saying they are going to come back to Aso Rock in 2027, they are not basing their claim on their performance. It's because something is happening behind the scene. Now, alarm is being raised that some of these politicians are planning to plant their loyalists as Inec workers for 2027 presidential election. So guys, this is unbelievable. What you are going to be hearing from this clip is going to shock you. Honestly, these politicians don't mean well for Nigeria. They don't really want this country to progress. When you hear people are defecting, why are they defecting? Because they know APC is the only rigging machine at the moment that will rig, and the judiciary is going to back it. I'm going to allow you to take a look at this, and we all have to be very vigilant, because what happened to us in 2023 cannot repeat itself. So guys, take your time, watch this video to the end to see some of the secrets that are being leaked at the moment. Just take a look for yourself.
Ahead of the 2027 elections, civil society leaders are raising the alarm that politicians are planning to invade electoral body Inec to plant their stooges in the commission as the tenure of Chairman Mahmoud Yakubu and other commissioners expires. Now, at a press conference on election, actually a conference on election and poverty in Nigeria, leaders and stakeholders in the civic space allege that there are moves by politicians to plant their loyal members in the commission, as 6 prominent resident electoral commissioners and the current INEC chairman are due to step aside soon. Professor of Political Science and a former commissioner in the National Election Commission, Adeliji Nodu, says politicians plan, they actually want to plant their supporters as part of the state capture and control of the electoral body.
All the institution has been captured. And so where lies the citizen? But let me be very frank and first summarize it to say the problem lies on us. The truth is that until we rise beyond our individual organizations, and the problem also lies with the donors. I might not say this, I say it with over 30 years working in this sector. The donors has those they fund. The greatest corruption in this country today is the donor. You know, he said, before you pick anything from anybody's life, first of all, check yourself. He said, those who seek equity must what? Come with clear hands.
We have noticed in the past, there is a tendency for you to have, imagine, a political class that wants to make sure, as part of its state capture, control of the electoral body by putting in partisan supporters of the party in power to serve on the INEC.
Pathway to peaceful elections in 2027 is to ensure all Nigerians, whether they agree or do not agree with the government, have a right to contest elections with their parties without having the government interfering systematically in the internal affairs of parties.
Well, the National Assembly and electoral body, INEC, are discussing electoral reforms in Nigeria. INEC is calling on the National Assembly to expedite action on the Electoral Amendment Bill to allow for the prompt implementation by the Commission. Well, we are now joined by Adeliji Nodu, Professor of Political Science and a former commissioner in the National Election Commission, as it was then known, NEC. Also with us is Ezenwa Uwagu, who is the chairman of Partners for Electoral Reforms. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the news tonight. Well, if you can hear me, let me begin with you, Professor Jinodu, in the studio with us. Allegations of political interference in electoral body INEC are not new. In fact, it's almost synonymous with every election cycle. But I'm sure Nigerians want to know, when you make such allegations as huge as this, to say stooges are to be planted by politicians ahead of the election, are there any concrete evidence? Are we talking about names, patterns or repeated cycles of failure. What exactly is it that you are raising the alarm for? Do you know these people? Professor Jinadu.
Let me start by saying that these are not allegations. I don't deal in allegations. But as a trained political scientist, social scientist, I look at trends, what the trends portend. And I feel it is my duty as a political scientist and as someone in whom this country has invested a lot in terms of my education, that I owe that responsibility when I see trends that portend ill for the country. I have that duty to say it. And what I am saying is that when I look at the trends, I see trends that show quite clearly that there's an attempt, or there are moves, or there are indications that there's an attempt not only to misuse state power of incumbency for partisan political advantage. That is a general point I'm making, and it applies everywhere. But my concern in the case of Nigeria is that the guardrails that should prevent such abuse of power are being seriously eroded. And I think that is the point I'm not making allegations. Right. What I'm simply saying is that in terms of what I see from my own, I may be wrong, I may be right.
Your perspective.
But I also owe that responsibility to and I'm not talking to the political class. I'm talking to Nigerians. Right. That they should not allow this to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, very, very well said. Ezenwa, let me bring this to you. I mean, how would you react to this very serious allegations that there are actually plans by politicians to plant their stooges in the electoral umpire that ordinarily should be totally independent? I mean, I'd like you to respond to that. And the point made by Professor Adele here that there is a need to set up guardrails, and the responsibility is that of Nigerians. The electorate need to wake up and smell the coffee.
Well, thank you. I think it is part of what we know that politicians would always seek dubious advantage, if you permit the use of that word. And the way that has happened is that the sacred institutions, especially the one that is responsible for leadership recruitment, is somewhere that they want to invest quite a lot in. But the guardrails, and in this particular case, what we are dealing with is a dereliction of responsibility. By first and foremost, if you are dealing with appointments into the Independent National Electoral Commission, for instance, the president will nominate. And then when he nominates, first the secret police will have responsibility to profile the individuals that the president wants to nominate. And then after nomination, he would either go to Council of State, which is populated by people who ordinarily should be statesmanly in their outlook to these issues, and then is taken to the National Assembly, particularly now when we have some semblance of what looks like a multi-party National Assembly. The expectation is that the committees on electoral matters, both Senate and House of Representatives, the Committee on Intelligence, and such other relevant committees within the National Assembly will do the due diligence. But what is happening is the abdication of that responsibility, and Professor Jinadu and many of us are outsourcing their own responsibility to civil society and the media. And that has happened in the past. If you remember, when President Buhari nominated Mrs. Loreto Onochie, the civil society and the media rose vehemently against her nomination. But in subsequent nominations that has happened, what we have seen is that the National Assembly has cleared people that even civil society and media have raised questions about their eligibility or otherwise. So when you have that dereliction, what is our responsibility? Our responsibility is to put these issues in the front burner of conversation, but the duty bearers, which is perhaps the National Assembly, in the case of appointments, once they derelict their responsibility, there is not much anybody can do.
Okay, Professor Jinadu, I want us to talk specifics, because initially you said politicians. At the moment, we have 18 registered political parties in Nigeria, and as as the other guest, Nwango, has said, the burden of appointment begins with the president's nomination. However, the Senate has an important role to screen and ensure that these people are passed or not passed. But when you say politicians want to put their stooges, can we be specific as to who are these politicians? Do they cut across the 18 political parties? And then what do you say to the Nigerian Senate at this time?
No, my point is clear. My point is that those who hold political power, who are in government, are using their privileged position as government and using that position to plant their people in places where they want them to do their bidding. I'm not talking of all, I'm taking the abuse of the power of incumbency is what I'm talking about.
So it
by governing parties.
Political parties.
Yeah, by governing parties at the federal and state level. I'm not talking about the political, when I talk about the political class generally, they are of course part of the leadership, but the specific, as I said in my point, is that the abuse of the power of incumbency by governments for partisan political advantage. That is what I'm saying. And that is, and there's a clear pattern of that in our political history, so right from 54.
It's not new what you're saying.
It's
been
not
the pattern since
but
1999,
but it's getting more and more alarming now.
Right.
And what one is sounding is that when you look at the pattern, let me give some example. You know, we know what happened in the Western region between 1962 and 64, when the power, the federal might, was used to decapitate a major political party in this country. We know it was, how it was done. And part of that whole process, of course, was that the Electoral Commission at that time was also part of that crisis. In fact, 3 electoral commissioners resigned because they were unhappy about what was being done. And you can see that pattern again now, right, through the arrogant use of political power by parties in government at the federal and state level, that they can do anything they want. And they are doing it because we have been silent. We have given them free hand. And what I'm simply saying, that Nigerians must get up. Nigerians must get up and say enough is enough, as has been done otherwise. And it can be done in terms of what the Constitution provides.
Right. Ezenwanwagu, I mean, you heard Professor Jinodu there. Well, we do hear that the National Assembly and electoral body INEC are discussing electoral reforms in Nigeria. What kind of reforms are we even talking about? Is it reforms that we need, or the political will to do the right thing? And then the question that's being raised again, should the power to elect or to appoint the electoral umpire, the chairman, and at the different levels, should it reside with the president? Or is there a need to create some kind of independent body, you know, to make INEC truly independent, to live up to its name?
Well, like I said, whichever way you go, there, you know, the conversation about Justice Uwais' recommendation about NJC, about such other bodies. There are people who have said advertise the position, and when you advertise the position, you still come back to the National Assembly, you still come back to the president. So the big challenge is, in my view, the abdication of that responsibility by these oversight institutions. So whether you talk about NJC, NJC is a creation of the Constitution, INEC is a creation of the, should one commission be oversighting another commission? Those are big, you know, questions. But whether you need reforms is a huge question. You need reforms, but you don't have to make it a ritual. For instance, that's engagement between INEC and the National Assembly and some other stakeholders is something that happens every legislative year. And when we make laws, we don't allow those laws. For instance, by the time the Electoral Act 2022 was used in 2023, it was only 1 year old. In February, it was 1 year old, and we have not even tested that law, tried it, learned from it, because there has to be lessons. Every time you do election, you conduct elections, the lessons that come from it is for you to improve the next one. So, but this whole industry of electoral reform, you know, is becoming such that at every legislative year, this kind of gatherings happen. But the big issue that we are having is the challenge of responsibility. And we see that institutions that have responsibility abdicate that responsibility. So, and that is why you are seeing this conversation about new changes and all of that.
Let me take you up very quickly before we come back to Prof here. What do you think is responsible for that? Where, you know, at the different levels of where you should have these guardrails and people should take responsibility. What is hampering, you know, the different levels from taking responsibility? And would you say that the punitive measures are even there, or are they strong enough to ensure that people who drop the ball actually pay for it?
Fluidity of our political party system is nauseating, because in the true sense, you don't have opposition. You know, people are something in the morning, and later in the evening they have moved. People are elected under the banner of a political party. So in the true sense of it, there is no body who has the real power. For instance, if you nominate a candidate and you have the opposition in the National Assembly or in the Senate saying these things that all of us are saying, that this particular candidate is ineligible, but just follow the trend, as Prof has said. Whether 1999 to today, when the last nominations were made, civil society we did a petition to the National Assembly. As we speak now, people are in court. No political party issued a statement throughout that period of those nominations saying we do not want this candidate because they want to benefit from the disability of these nominees. So whether the penalties, the consequence management part of these things are what is lacking, you know, and the reason for it is patronage and cronism.
All right,
okay?
Professor, great. Professor, when you say you're calling on Nigerians, what exactly do you want Nigerians to do? And I asked you a question earlier, because as we know it, as the law stands, the president is responsible for the appointment and, in fact, the removal of the resident electoral commissioners. Inec at the moment is asking for the president to be stripped of those powers. Is that enough to insulate the commission from this political interference you speak about? And again, I ask you, the Senate, and what should Nigerians do? Because you're calling on them.
Look, it's a very complex problem, and there are various facets of it. The appointment process is one aspect of it.
Right.
And I am concerned about that, because if the provisions for that are deliberately disregarded, there should be a basis for concern. But all those who believe in the rule of law, I think that point needs to be made. But the wider issue of the independence of the commission itself is a separate issue, because that commission itself is in a political environment when the abuse of political power is used to manipulate, distort the electoral process. Take procurement, for example. Everywhere the world over, the procurement process in terms of political parties is a way of directing money to political parties as part of their war chest by those who want to get support from them. But there are guardrails that prevent that. The media itself is part of that guardrail. In Kenya, for example, when the ruling party used a procurement process to fight elections, it was the media that exposed it. What does the bundy do here? So it's a very, but my simple point is that we ought to be awake.
Right.
And let me tell you one thing also. Yeah. I am not really concerned about the appointment process, because ultimately what is
not where it begins.
No, it's not where it begins there, but it doesn't mean that. I mean, take in some other places, the U.S. Supreme Court is appointed by the president through a process, and they have tenure of appointment until retirement. You know, but those appointed by the Democrats or those appointed by the Republicans have turned out to be to take decisions against those who appoint them. But this is important.
Yes.
But let me just, this is because we have studied. There are certain electoral commissions in Africa that are that what is important is the integrity of the leadership. The integrity, not just the mode of appointment, it's the integrity.
Well, the question is,
and
how do you find persons of integrity
so that is the point. So the appointment process itself is not foolproof. That's what I'm saying.
It's sad.
And I wonder if okay, we have to go, but if I could just ask Prof, because you have been part of this institution, I mean, in the past, and you're now a member of the civil society space. What is the singular biggest challenge why we have not been able to break this cycle of political interference in the electoral body?
Nigerians must wake up.
Okay, throwing it back.
They must wake up,
Nigerians.
and it's been done elsewhere. They must wake up. There must be pressure on them.
30 seconds. Nigerians must wake up. Is it in the hands of Nigerians to fix this?
Nigerians have a role to play, but the president cannot remove a resident electoral commissioner. That is not correct. He has to go to the National Assembly and get to third of the if he can't even remove once they've been cleared by the National Assembly, you have to still go back to the National Assembly. That point, but we all have a responsibility as patriots to be concerned about the integrity of INEC. But it doesn't have to be about good or bad people. It has to be about the oversighting institutions being awake, being responsible, and then Nigerians putting the fire on their feet.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us on Newsnight. Professor Adeleke Odu is former commissioner, National Electoral Commission. And of course, Ezenwa Nwagu is chairman, partner.
So guys, you have seen it for yourself. These are the things we are saying there. When you mention APC, just mention fraud. These are two synonyms. You know, these two words, they are synonyms. They don't care. You know, APC is synonym to fraud. They don't think about legality in whatever they are doing. Look at, since this government came into play, all the promises they promised Nigerians, even the investment they told Nigerians are coming in, the investors are coming, that some have even brought in money, all of them foul. They are just there to lure the people, and then you think they are working. I'm just wondering, why is it that anything that has to do with APC represents fraud? The second name to this APC-led government is fraud. And that's why people are just wondering, why are these old politicians, some of them have spent more than 20 years in the House of Assembly, some of them were governors, they served 8 terms, they went to another position, and they still want to come back again. Is Nigeria meant for them alone? Somebody like Tinubu, who is on lifetime pension as an ex-governor, on lifetime pension as an ex-senator, on lifetime, very soon he will probably be on lifetime pension as a president. Still, Tinubu is not satisfied. His wife is also a lifetime pensionist, you know, as an ex-senator. But these people are never satisfied. To worsen it is that they don't even have idea on how to lead Nigeria. They don't even have any idea. President Obasanjo said that Tinubu came into power without preparation, without plan. He just said that somebody, you can become president, we need a Yoruba man, it's Yoruba turn. And he just jumped out of the bush and say, it's Emilokon. And today, he's in Aso Rock, not knowing his left from his right. Now, there's this fraudulent act, you know, by the APC. They brought a report that has been trending that Nigeria is the third fast-growing economy in the world. And people were believing it, not until somebody now went to research and was like, They say Nigeria is the third, you know, people believe that report when it was flying everywhere on the social media, not until somebody now went to dig to know that Nigeria is not even among the first 30 fast-growing economy. Nigeria is not even included. So when you just look at APC, what comes to your mind is fraud. These are people that there's nothing truthful about them. There's no truth in their mouth. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell. Please give this video a like so that YouTube can recommend it to others, and drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you.